Thank you to Nino and mcCain Institute and all the organizers for putting this very interesting conference together, and all the speakers we've heard already and will be for this coming evening and tomorrow. I think it's very important and crucial times, and I believe that we all agree on that. Not only for Georgia, and probably Georgia is the last thing we should be talking here about. I completely agree with you. All the problems and troubles and challenges of the world today, whether it's from ISIS or Russia or any other that we can give a long list here, should be seen as one full picture. Small components of one big problem that the world has today. And I cannot talk here without responding to some of the comments we've already heard here this morning, as I think that it's all interrelated. Again, all these threats, all the challenges, I want to put together once again, whether they are coming from north of Georgia or south of Georgia. And I think there is one common word unifying all of that, which is the missing strong leadership of the world. And I cannot agree more with Ambassador Walker when he said that stronger NATO gets, stronger NATO's response gets, is better for everybody, regardless of being members or not being members of NATO. And unfortunately, I think this is what is missing from today's world. Strong voice from NATO and from European Union for that matter. What is missing in today's world is the positive agenda that we all want to see, how NATO sees itself, how NATO sees the world in 5, 10, 20 years, rather than responding, creating all those plans, action plans for responding to threats and challenges that the world is facing today. It's the same for Russia. It's the same for the rest of the troubles that the world is facing. What we are missing, the main components will be a roadmap, as seen, as drawn, positive roadmap from the NATO. So that's why probably today there is so much concentration as to Article 5 countries. That's why probably there is so much concern about internal security within the NATO membership. And that's why probably the Warsaw Summit is seen by many as a summit about the members more than about anything else. I think here is the dilemma, because I strongly believe, and we in this country strongly believe, that if NATO fails here in Georgia, it will fail in so many different directions. If NATO shows the weakness towards Russia and gives Russia the veto power, as it states every day clearly, Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Putin, everybody, you name it, from the Russian ruling elite, does not miss a chance not stating that they do have a veto power and they do influence the decision making in NATO. As soon as it is certified in Warsaw, I believe that lots of other forces and lots of other people out there in the world will start believing that if they push hard, then they can get away as well, and they can stop NATO as well, and they can scare them all as well, the same way as Russia did in case of Georgia or Ukraine for that matter. This is why some of the statements that Lithuanian Minister of Foreign Affairs, absolutely one of the biggest friends of Georgia, supporters of Georgian cause, were unacceptable for me, and I kind of waved head to him when he was speaking. Because sometimes, well, we know that it's a cynical world. We know it's not about the fairness. We know we accept it, we understand it. But it sounds not very nice here in Tbilisi when we are asked also, together with accepting, is liking, to like it and to be happy about it. That's something that is beyond our ability. Again, we can accept it, but we are going to fight against it, and we are going to prove to the world that there is another reality, and we just don't take things for granted. I think it was Randy who said that if there is one country who deserves membership now, and it should have been done in Warsaw already, will be Montenegro. And as much as I support Montenegro's advance, in Warsaw, because it does prove the fact that open door policy stays as open door and countries are actually walking in those open doors. I always have this question, what it is fundamentally so different between Montenegro and Georgia that makes Montenegro a country where less than 1/3 of the population supports NATO membership, more fit for membership than Georgia, with 2/3 support approval rating for NATO, with all the commitment to this cause. Not fit even for MAP, not to talk about the membership. And I think this is where these lines of cynicism are drawn in today's world. But again, this is kind of a challenge we accept, and obviously we are going to talk about the lots of details and lots of issues during this conversation, but just for a starter, I wanted to show the mood that is driving this government today, and that is driving me personally for these 4 months, and as long as I'll be in this job, to break all the walls that stand in front of us, to fight all the wars that are necessary in every corridors and rooms, and to get there, and to convince everybody that if there is anything in this world that should be happening in Warsaw, that will be enlargement. That will be the only proper answer from the NATO to the kind of challenge Russia is sending to the world today. Enlargement not only to Montenegro, but also to a country like Georgia, that long deserves it, that is ready for it, and is only waiting for that elephant to be out, to be kicked out of the room that is always there whenever the decisions are to be made about Georgia. So I will stop here, and again, looking forward for an engaging conversation on more specifics and more details of this issue.
2008, August 2008, that we received to Warsaw the information about the invasion of Russian troops to Georgia. And together with Minister Sikorski, we began interventions in Brussels, phone conversations, and we received news that unfortunately the Secretary General is on vacations on Shepherd Islands, and it will be difficult to reach him. We tried to find his deputy, and I had a chance to have a conversation with Claudio Bisogniero, who was at that time the Deputy Secretary General, and unfortunately we were refused to receive a confirmation that next day there will be a meeting of the ambassadors of the North Atlantic Council. It happened, of course. It happened, of course, but it was on Tuesday, as far as I remember, not directly after our effort. But after that, there was a gradual involvement of NATO and particular members of the alliance to support your capabilities during last years here in Georgia. How would you, Madam Minister, describe, let's say, the outcome of this involvement, and to what extent you are satisfied with the current involvement of NATO countries in enhancing your security?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. After many things have changed after 2008, and we've been recipient of so many different programs and support from our Western allies, actually since the end of '90s. But there is an important difference to be made, as between support of Georgia as a country delivering its troops to Afghanistan, and support of Georgia that needs support here domestically on the ground. So if you put it in comparative terms, that yes, world has been extremely active, standing ready for supporting us by all possible means when it comes to our troops going to Afghanistan, which is serving our security interests at the end of the day, because we are proud of those 12,000 soldiers who went through this route and got all the experience and necessary skills. But at the same time, when it comes to defending our security locally and getting support domestically, then it gets less and less year after another. And this is probably one of the cynicisms of that world that I was talking about as well. For example, just probably the best example of that will be Georgia being on this mute trade embargo, arms trade embargo since 2008. And it was the first time this summer when we have signed the deal with French, when we actually got, at least in one country, doors open. But since then it did not serve as a triggering factor that all the other countries stand ready to offer the same kind of contributions. We don't really get that much. There are some, but not across the board of all NATO countries. So it also speaks for a lot of the problems that Georgia is still facing today. And when we talk about the security, that's exactly probably one and only defining issues for the policy that we are engaged in. Linas was saying here that we need to use all the leverage. And I don't really understand that. I don't accept that sentence, and I don't understand that sentence. I don't even know what it means that Minister was talking about. Because when making comparisons between Lithuania when it was entering NATO and Georgia today, I think that's where it gets fundamentally wrong. Because Lithuania, as far as I remember, did not have 6,000 regular troops on its ground of a Russian military power and another additional 6,000 in rotational terms, and did not have 20% of its territory occupied, and did not have every single morning waking up expecting for another act of aggression happening in his country. This is a completely different world. These are two completely different states on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's a completely different world, with war in Ukraine, occupation and active daily aggression in Georgia, than it was back then when Baltics were becoming members of European Union and NATO. Baltics, as it was rightly mentioned, were three fighting together, standing together, going for the same cause, and we are standing alone in this neighborhood, fighting for this cause and going for this cause. And it also makes a world of difference. Baltics had European Union member countries on its borders, we have none. There are lots of things that matter in today's world that make today's world completely different from the times that Mr. Minister was talking about. And obviously, when we are told, as Wendy was saying, to be modest about, while talking about the NATO, I say out loudly, I'm not going to get modest. It's not an option for us, because now here we are talking about the survival of the state that has been shrinking since '94. Irakli Alasania was saying here that that's the time when we knocked on NATO doors, and since that very moment when we knocked on NATO doors first time in '94, this country has been shrinking year after year. And I don't know where we will be after 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, what will be left of Georgia if things continue as they are today. That's why things need to be seen in as, I might sound very dramatic here, but things are extremely dramatic here. I cannot joke about these things, although I understand when you sit on a panel and talk to the audience, it's nice to make jokes, but I spare jokes for another time, because things are extremely dramatic, and this dramatism and this extremism that is shown by our northern neighbor needs to be addressed properly. And again, it's about, for us, it's absolutely existential issue, whether it's going to be today, this December, or next July on the summit, or summit after that, or ministerial after that. Every 6 months make a huge difference for Georgia. And it's not like, okay, let's wait for another 2 years, things might change, and you might go ahead with the plan. Yes, probably we will do. In 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, 100 years, well, Georgia survived all the centuries, all the enemies, all the fights, all the wars, and we are going to survive. But the issue and question is, what will be left of it? What will be the part of the country actually going on a membership track? So that's why, again, as tragic it might sound, or as dramatic it might sound, that's the reality. And we all need to face this reality with very open eyes and with very clear vision of what's going to happen tomorrow in this country, in Ukraine, in Estonia, in any other country for that matter, where Russia does have its claims of the influence to be of its influence to be transferred to. So that's the security reality in here on the ground.
to focus for a while, only for a while, on the European Union, because we concentrated on your assessment and let's say the way forward to the NATO summit. But to speak about the European Union's involvement here in Georgia, what would be your assessment of the current shape of relationship between the EU and Georgia? I still keep in mind the enthusiastic reaction of Georgian society last year during the June Batumi Security Conference, when you celebrated with our participation the association agreement with the European Union. How would you assess, this year behind us and the way forward? What would be also your expectations concerning the involvement of the European Union, partially in the sphere of security and broadly in integration between the EU and Georgia?
Well, I'm kind of more optimistic about the European Union and this formula of more Georgia to somewhere and more something to Georgia will more apply to EU than to NATO at this moment of time, I guess. There is more European Union in Georgia. You can see it on a daily basis, both with getting strength for the CFTA and actual use of it, and in terms of visa liberalization. I very much hope that by the end of the year we will get positive response. The visit of the President was in July, was very optimistic. He was very straightforward in a Polish way, very enthusiastic about Georgia getting closer and actually gaining strength and getting actual tools and instruments for joining NATO and for joining European Union. And I do hope and believe that December this year will mark this advance in a practical way as well, and it will go beyond the statements, and we will actually get the ticket to the our citizens will get a ticket to the European Union. And as I've said, the CFTA is one of a huge tool that is still there to be fully implemented and to be fully workable for the citizens of Georgia. The government is trying its best in this direction, but again, all the assistance we are getting from member countries as well as from the Commission is extremely useful and important in this direction. I would say that security-wise, we can also have more support and more instruments used from Brussels, from the European Union perspective, but I guess that on that everybody's eyes are turned into different offices in the same city called NATO, and both European Union and member countries are looking forward for the December ministerial and its decisions, its mood, and after that we can have more structural approach to this issue from the European Union side as well. But at this moment, you don't have that much of a talk from in that direction.
As we know, here the European Union faces a variety of challenges, not only those very visible, I mean the flow of migrants to the territory of the EU countries, especially to the southern flank of the EU, but also its own problems with some policies of the EU, and one of them is the security and defense policy of the EU that, according to my assessment, is still unfortunately in crisis. This is not the first crisis of CSDP, this is the second crisis during last 11 years of the history of this policy, but still we lack the political will to go ahead and to use those instruments that could be used in such situations that we witness in the southern or eastern flank. For example, permanent structured cooperation of the battle groups, for example, the clause of mutual assistance. So this is the current posture of the EU concerning Georgia and your region is also one of the effects of the current crisis, internal crisis of CSDP. From our point of view, the reaction of NATO on Russian threat that emerged so visibly in 2008 and mainly 2 years ago, according to the invasion and annexation of Crimea and an invasion of Russian troops into eastern Ukraine, the reaction for members of the alliance was clear and satisfying. When involvement of NATO and support of NATO to Ukraine itself, and before that here in Georgia itself, was not satisfying. So this is this difference even from the position point of view of some elites in some member states of the alliance. But I would like to turn for a while at least to the audience and to enable our colleagues to ask you, Madam Minister, several questions. Who would like to do that? Please.
My name is Nika Chitadze. I represent International Blacks University. With your permission, I have a question related to, of course, integration of Georgia to the Euro-Atlantic structures. From one side, we know that according to the article number 10 of the NATO Charter, any European state could become a member of NATO if this country expresses readiness to make some contribution to the Euro-Atlantic security. And by the involvement of Georgia in the different peacekeeping operations together with NATO member and EU member countries in Afghanistan or Central Asia, Central Africa, etc., Georgia proved, of course, that about its readiness to be the contributor. But from the other side, we know that in 1995, within the NATO, it was adopted the document under the name Research on Enlargement, according to which any country which would like to become plenipotentiary member of NATO should satisfy different political, security, military, economic, etc., standards, and so on. So, according of those documents, in your point of view, what are the main strengths and weaknesses of Georgia towards Euro-Atlantic integration? You mentioned about the problem of the territorial integrity, but together with this problem, what other obstacles there are here, and what are the strengths? Thank you very much.
I'm an MP with the parliamentary minority. Georgi Kandalaki is my name. Madam Minister, you said many things that I would certainly subscribe to. The President, in his intervention, mentioned the worrying increase of NATO skeptic or pro-Russian attitudes. And of course, one reason for such increase is the Russian soft power effort that is much talked about in Western capitals these days, which is also present in Georgia. How do you explain recent evidence that some of the pro-Russian media organizations in this country are receiving money from the government? Also, how do you reconcile with openly pro-Russian political leaders as leaders of the Georgian Dream Coalition? And finally, I have to repeat myself, do you share the Prime Minister's statement that Ukraine should not be allowed to acquire defensive weapons? Thank you.
I think, yeah, it does. Well, talking about the main strengths and weaknesses of Georgia on this Euro-Atlantic integration process, it's a whole new theme of the whole conference, I guess. There are so many different aspects to it, starting from economics, finishing with the strength of army. I don't even know how to respond, but I think that there are two major strengths that Georgia is proud of and should be evaluated on the basis of its own merits when we talk about either membership or making steps towards membership. One, that will be our contribution to the world security, and Georgians being loyal, strong, reliable partners for all these years do make us reliable partners in any other direction, not just for Iraq or Afghanistan or any other commitment of that kind. And the other one will be this absolutely, regardless of the fact, I agree with Georgi, of growing skepticism in Georgia, and yes, Russia making its moves with the soft power. I'll talk about this a little later. Regardless of that, the strong commitment of the Georgian people and for all these 25 years, very clearly shown fight for the European cause. General Hodges was saying here that Ukraine Ukraine is probably the only country where people are dying with the EU flags in their hands. As much as I like that statement, I would argue with that, because Georgians also were dying with the EU flags in their hands for all these 25 years, and they fought not just one war in 2008 August, but they fought lots of wars throughout these 25 years of independence, exactly for this cause and exactly for this purpose. Those two things probably make us count for the strongest points for us and make us the country that should be taken for granted already after all these years, when there is a discussion about our perspective to either NATO or European Union. As for the other questions, well, I do agree about the increase of the Russian soft power. This is reality, unfortunately. It's reality not just in Georgia, but in lots of European Union member countries as well, and you see it across the board. You see influence of Russian media, you see influence of Russian money, NGOs, you name it. Lots of different variations depending on the countries. And it is here as well. Fortunately, those voices are pretty marginal so far in Georgia, and if there is anything, I have a full confidence that will be my nation, and I do have full confidence that this country will never turn to that path again. And actually, Russia is probably the biggest ally on that, having their tanks rolling in and out all the time, or their helicopters flying in and out on the territory of Georgia does not make them the most friendly and most lovable nation out of all to go on that direction ever again. And as for the last question, I've answered it many times for you, and I'm going to answer it again. No, I don't agree. I've been advocating in many countries, in many places, in many conferences for exactly a different cause, and that's no news for you because you've heard it so many times from me already. So I don't change my positions by changing the chairs where I sit, being Member of Parliament or Minister of Defense for that matter.
Thank you. We had only half an hour granted by the organizers for this conversation. Do you have, colleagues, any other questions concerning those issues that we described during this discussion? If not, thank you very much.